Welcome again to the session on poetry. We had taken up Tears, Idle Tears by Tennyson in our last session, and today we are taking his second poem, The Lotus Eaters, prescribed for our syllabus. The poem Lotus Eaters was included in the volume which included The Lady of Shalott and Enone and belongs to the early phase of Tennyson's career. The poem is the story of based on a story in Homer's Odyssey, book 9th, where Odysseus, who is also known as Ulysses, and his companions land on the island of Latafoggy, that is the Lotus Eaters. And the eating of the fruit had a lethargic effect on those who ate it and gave rise to the feeling of contentment, inertia. And in the Odyssey, this account is brief and is devoid of certain details which Tennyson has created in the poem. Now, these two poems, Ulysses and Lotus Eaters, they are not actually written at the same time, but they are companion poems because they express two different moods in life of Ulysses. And this poem is another of Tennyson's poem which is very famous and is of classical inspiration. And the story in Homer's Odyssey, it goes like this that early in the 10 years' journey home from Troy, Odysseus came with his comrades to the land of Lotus Eaters. And he describes it himself in the following words. We'll read the words so that we have an idea how Tennyson was inspired by the story from Odyssey. Thence for 9 whole days was I borne by ruinous winds over the teeming deep, but on the 10th day we set foot on the land of Lotus Eaters, who eat a flowery food. So we stepped ashore and drew water, and straightway my company took their midday meal by the swift ships. Now, when we tasted meat and drink, I sent certain of my company to go and make search what manner of men these Lotus Eaters were. Then straightway they went and mixed with the Lotus Eaters, and so it was that Lotus Eaters devised not death for our fellows, but gave them the lotus to taste. Now, whosoever of them did eat the honey sweet fruit of the lotus had no more wish to bring tidings nor to come back, but there he chose to abide with the lotus eating men, ever feeding on lotus and forgetful of his homeward way. This, these lines, which inspired Tennyson, they have a subtle charm, and Tennyson beautifully seized and developed the charm of these lines with its peculiar genius into a poem. He has also supplied a background of scenery as beautiful, harmonious with the general atmosphere of the poem, where everything is saturated with the influence of the lotus. And apart from this, the beauty of the poem is perhaps, we can say, the most perfect expression of drowsy, sensuous mood, which was apt at times to overcome the most vigorous natures. And few people who seek a morale in this poem may easily find a moral because the forgetfulness of duty that results from self indulgence is the moral of the story. But a poem of such, we can say, consummate art cannot have been primarily didactic. So we should rather enjoy it as an interpretation of an ancient theme by one of the greatest poets of the times. This poem is the best proof of great advance which Tennyson had made in the art of construction. Now, this can be called as a piece which can hardly be paralleled except in Spenser, and sometimes it is also called a delicious poem because Tennyson, although was not conscious of this, but when he indulged himself into sensuous enjoyment and indulgence, this creates more beauty for the poem. In the land of lotus eaters, there is a phrase in the poem which says, "It is always afternoon. Work is hateful, and the lotus land is full of sensuous pleasures." He also says that there is sweet music, again, from the line from the poem, that softer falls than petals from blown roses on the grass. There are long leaved flowers growing on the banks of the stream. So these things are placed by Tennyson on the languid dreamers in a land where it seems that earth and heaven, the sea and the gods themselves, all of the things are in a languid dream. The sailors, after so much of strenuous life of action and danger, they naturally choose to be in such land, a land of self-indulgent repose, we can say, of the lotus eaters. The poem also gives expression to the mood of weary disgust. Now, what do we mean by weary disgust is that doubts force themselves on the mind, whether life has any price to offer or whether this toil and turmoil is worth winning. So mariners decide they are left with no desire to fight, and they are not ready to uphold the cause of right and the good. So it appears to them to be on an extremely hopeless task for so many years. So the lotus eaters are so work weary that they wish to reside in the lotus land indifferent to the sufferings and woes of mankind, as the gods which live on Mount Olympus. The poem is, we can say, a beautiful description of this mood of ease and rest. But there is also a feeling of dreadful woe. We'll discuss some of the other features of the poem later on, also as a summary and revision. But before that, let's start the poem, because if we don't start the poem, we don't understand. We are only taking up the first stanza today. There are five stanzas. The first section consists of five stanzas, and the poem starts with the word courage. And the word courage itself acts like an imperative, because the moment he says courage, an imperative mood is generated. The poet is able to establish a kind of a leadership, or the speaker, we can say, establishes a kind of leadership in the opening lines and leads the desperate men towards the land they can see from distance. And we can see that by the third line, they reach the shore, and from a point onwards, the readers are left to a world of rich description of landscape, afternoon, languid streams, waterfalls, snow capped mountains, and whatnot. So, this is how he captures the mood. And from afternoon, they breathe, they full face, the valley stood the moon like a downward smoke, and the cliff and pauses. So, we will read this poem in our next session. It's a longer poem. We might be requiring 2 sessions to complete the poem. But before that, we have to have an idea how Tennyson is able to create this mood of inertia. And I must say that before we start our next session, you have to at least read the story of Ulysses, so that you know what has inspired Tennyson for this poem, and how a very romantic kind of an imagery is being created. A description of the landscape takes us and import us to an altogether different world. Thank you.